Hey everyone, welcome to our latest webinar in the series of What's New in GoLand. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Florin and I'm a GoLand developer advocate at JetBrains. In today's presentation, What's New in 2021.2. If you don't know this series, you can find it on our YouTube channel, and all the presentation will revolve around a repository which you can then access and try the tips at your own pace. Where can you find this repository? Well, of course, on GitHub, under the JetBrains organization in the What's New in GoLand. For now, you won't see the 2021.2 tips, but I'm going to merge them towards the end of the presentation. Let's get into our presentation meanwhile. So, what's new in GoLand 2021.2? We've added a bunch of features, both for Go support, but also for web-related activities, and we will see some of them in this presentation. Others I won't cover and let you explore them at your own pace. We added a bunch of things in the version control system, a few things in Docker space as well, something new for Kubernetes, because hey, can't mention Docker without also saying something about Kubernetes, and a lot of things in the platform. Some of them which are really big and will make a difference in your day-to-day work. So let's start with the Go support that we added. Of course, as you know, Go releases twice a year in its major versions. 1.17 is due to be released sometime this week, next week, who knows. Maybe we'll get it as close as today, if we are lucky. So what have we done to make Go 1.17 development easy? Well, we added a bit of support for the latest features in Go 1.17. What those could be? First, Go 1.17 brings a change in the language itself. It's a single change in the language, but I think it's a pretty useful one if you ever dealt with this kind of operations. The feature itself revolves around arrays and converting a slice to an array pointer, and it's now part of the language rather than you having to deal with all the conversion manually and so on. You get to do a simple syntax such as this one. So all that you need to do here is take the slice that you want and use this special syntax to be able to convert it into a pointer for an array. Now, why is that important? Well, that's important because having an array in Go guarantees that whenever you do all sorts of operations, such as, let's say, an array access here, or a slice access in this case, Go itself will add some barriers to make sure that you're not somehow trying to access memory outside of the permitted area of the slice in this case. So if I were to do something like this, Go would catch it and say, hey, you're accessing an invalid memory location because you're out of bounds for the slice. I'm going to stop you because you're not allowed to read that. That's useful and that's good to be in the language, but at the same time, it incurs a penalty for the performance of your application. Now, not all applications need that kind of performance to optimize, but for those that need it, this feature is welcomed. So how do we know that, the feature works? I wrote a small instruction here in the comment before the main function that you should invoke this function in the terminal. So let's just do that. As you can see, you have the shortcuts that I'm going to press at the bottom of the screen. This is done through a plugin called Presentation Assistant. So let's run the command that I mentioned. Probably I should run it in the correct directory, which would be 2021.2, and then it's going to be the 01 convert pointer to slice. So when we run this, let me maximize all the escapes that all the screen that I have. So when we run this, you'll see that for Go on line 20, and you'll have to trust me on this one. See, I jumped to line 20. Whenever I do an access here, so char 10 is this one, char 17 is this one here. It says found is in bounds. So there's some check there. Whereas when I do the access here for the pointer to the array, that works just fine. So pretty neat, right? That's how we check that our code is using some bounds checking. And if it does, you'll see them here. If it doesn't, you won't see anything. The less you see, faster your application when performing some operations. Especially useful if you write a for loop, for example. Okay, now let's go back to our feature. The next thing that we added for Go support was the ability for you to run Go format in yet another different way. This time around, we added the support so that you can run it after you run the built-in formatter. Now, as some of you know, GoLand has a built-in formatter, right, for the code. If we jump back to this code and say something like, oh, I want to align this, you'd invoke it using reformat code, and it's going to produce an output that's compatible with GoFMT. Some people said and requested to us, hey, can you please make it so that we can run GoFMT just to ensure that everything is truly 100% compatible and there are no issues in your implementation? And we said, yeah, sure, let's do that. How do you enable this? If you go here to settings or preferences, if you're on macOS, click on editor, code style, Go, and in the other section, you'll find the on code reformat, run GoFMT. When you do that and click OK, after every time that you format your code, it's going to run GoFMT. Now, I can't show you any difference between GoFMT and our formatter because honestly, I couldn't find one. But I'm sure that if there's a edge case, running GoFMT after this would catch it and hopefully solve it. The best part is that it means you can stop using, for example, the file watchers, so that you don't need to run the file watcher for GoFMT on save, because you'll have this always available and the file is saved for GoFMT to work. It is that simple. Let's move to Go modules, because Go modules are a big part of Go. So up until now, you had no real way of triggering the Go mod changes manually. Say, for example, if I change anything here, I maybe want to run this on a different version, right? As soon as I do a change, Go list will run. And yeah, that's not exactly what you want always. Maybe you have more changes that you need to do. Again, some of our users told that, hey, can you make it so that I can run it manually? And we listened to that feedback. And I am happy to say that today you can do that. How do you make this change? Head over to settings or preferences, go to build, execution and deployment, click on the build tools, but don't go any further, and make sure you have reload project changes. And you can say, I'm sure that I want to make the changes externally from the IDE load automatically. But any other changes, so the changes that I'm doing while I'm in the editor, and I type, for example, I want them to be loaded manually. Click on the external changes, hit OK. And now let's say if I want to change this to 172, I will see a new image here showing up in the top corner of the IDE, top right corner, which says load Go modules, or you can dismiss it. So you can hide the notification. Assuming you want this feature to work, you want to hide the notification. You can also trigger it manually. There's a shortcut for that. So if you click on, in my case, Control-Shift-O, you'll trigger the change manually. But you can also click the button, and it's going to perform the change automatically. This is the shortcut for the macOS. Right. Again, it's an example, couldn't find that version, that's perfectly fine, but at least I was in control over when GoList runs. Cool. Let's go back to the presentation and go into the handling of Go versions from our Go mod file. So whenever you were creating a project using Go modules from GoLand, that was saying, let's say, Go version. Actually, let's jump into the mod files, right? And show the mod file. So I created this, Go 1.15, and so on, right? But then I started using features from Go 1.16, which is cool. But GoLand was not able to catch issues such as this one. So GoLand would say, hey, you're using Go 1.16. In fact, I think I'm using Go 1.17 RC1. And I'm looking at the code here, and it should be valid, but it's not, because while I'm using Go 1.17 as an SDK for my project, if I go back to the Go mod file, I see that, hey, 1.15 is here. So what do we do? The IDE now offers you the option to say, set the Go version to Go 1.16, because that's when this feature appeared. If we go back to our Go mod file, you'll see that this changed into Go 1.16. So I can say undo, and you can see the change being done here. So from now on, GoLand will be able to say, hey, you're using a feature that's above your set SDK version. Do you want to upgrade your SDK version from the Go mod file to match your requirement? As long as your Go SDK from the project supports it, of course. Let's close this and go back to our README. So I see a question from someone asking if this is going to be recorded. Yes, it is going to be recorded. And don't worry, you'll be able to find it very soon after we finish this because of the magic of YouTube. Okay, let's move on. Another inspection that we added, or a feature to handle Go modules, better said, is the unused dependency in Go mod files. How does that work? Let's say you have a Go module file. You have a bunch of dependencies, you added some, you removed some, but you haven't removed all of them. And your code maybe has no need for, let's say, Gorilla Mux anymore. Now the IDE is able to detect that and can say, hey, this is an unused dependency. Do you want to remove it? And when you hit the sync dependencies, you'll be able to do that. This is useful if you want to tidy up your Go modules, and that's the best way to handle this. Another feature, especially useful, it's not related to Go modules itself, but it's especially useful in Go modules context. Especially in the context where you, for example, say, have 2-3 different services, or maybe you're working on a main project and a few libraries that are dependent, and you want to perform some changes in those libraries. How do you do that? Well, you could go here and say file, open, maybe it's in the recent list, and I'm gonna pick Delph because I like Delph. You have this dialog here, which says, hey, do you want to open a project either in this window, in a new window? So probably some of you would choose that, or use the attach feature. Now, the attach feature is not new, and you could find it in quite a few versions back for the IDE. But what changed is the way this works and how it looks like. So now you can see both projects being independent in the project tree view. So I can work on Delph and I can work on my presentation too. You may wonder, okay, but say I don't work always on my libraries or on the other microservice that's dependent on this one. That's cool. You can right click on this or use search everywhere with the project root detected. And you can say remove from project view. So when you do that, it's going to ask you, hey, do you want to remove this project from your current project view? Do you want to detach the project, basically? Hit yes, remove, and the project is detached. You can see it here. That's simple. Let's go to the web features. We spoke about Go features enough. So there are quite a few web features. I'm not going to go through all of them. But for example, this one, where you have a browser, let's say you have a file, right? And you have a browser that you can preview this. You could choose the built-in browser, and you would need to say, for example, hey, hello world, I want this to be an H2. I'm gonna save this. It's all good. Perfect, works. But what if you don't want to use the built-in browser, right? So what do you do then? You could configure a list of browsers, and you can do that in settings. You can say browsers. And under settings here, you'd see that there's a bunch of other browsers, or you can add your own custom one that are supported out of the box. For example, one of them is Chrome. Let's use Chrome for our demonstration. Although in my day-to-day use, I use Firefox, obviously. And you can't see it because it opened on another window, but hey, this is where it is right now. Let me put this side by side quickly. Oops. Well, it doesn't work as nicely when I'm in Zen mode, but let's try to make a change here. I'm gonna save this, and without me reloading, it changed the format for this. Maybe not as visible, but if I say from GoLand here and save it, just Alt-Tab without refreshing, and you see it there. So now you can test, for example, in Firefox, in Chrome, and in Safari. If you want, at the same time, all the browsers will be reloaded automatically. At least for me, who I'm not an expert on front ends, that's a pretty nifty feature. It makes my life a lot easier to make sure that the front ends I'm designing are exactly what I want to. Speaking of front ends not being that easy to design for me, designing front ends and interacting with them needs JavaScript. And if you need JavaScript or TypeScript, you probably had this problem before. Say you pass some parameters to this function, right? The array object and whatever structure member and so on. But then you want to get completion out of the array or the object, and you're not sure which one of these all methods apply to your object. Well, you'll be happy to know that now the completion for parameters in JavaScript takes into account the type that you're using. So for example, for arrays, you'll see first the relevant items for arrays, such as concat. For an object, you'll see the members of that object, right? So the fields like version and name, and then you'll see all the other things. But as you can see, they are highlighted differently too. And you'll know that the IDE prioritized those fields because it says so. It says JavaScript completion for parameter types based on function call from the call demo.js. So it takes into account multiple places. And yeah, you can basically continue for every object type. And I think it's magic, honestly. I think it's an awesome feature that our colleagues created. Oh, and yes, as the pro tip says, you can narrow down the list even further if you use the smart type completion. I'll let you figure this one out. Okay, moving forward with some live templates for this. How do you create an arrow function? Well, I type just 3 letters, ARF, and hit enter. Then I just, let's say, use the suggested name. It's like the IDE reads my mind. And I have that. Bam. So all those keystrokes that I saved by just typing ARF enter, 4 keys to produce this. Here's a feature I'm not going to show you. It's the code completion for private NPM packages. Yes, that works now. So in package.json, if you want to declare a private package, now that works. Pretty much like it would be a public one. Another fun feature, I spoke earlier about JavaScript or TypeScript for frontends and how you can't escape those. Well, let's see how we can't escape those either. Now, I accidentally have shown how this works, but let's pretend you haven't saw that one. How do you make name and version know that these are, let's say, parameters of type string and so on? I'm not going to type all of this again, but yeah, you get the idea. You just notate it with a TypeScript reference, such as this one, and you say, hey, name is a string, version is a string, and my function returns an object of type ID. And bam, that's it. And string appeared, and string appeared here. Now I could do, for example, int, oops, and you can see I got the integer, but I also got something that tells me, hey, are you sure you want this? Because we detected that you're trying to pass an integer here into a field that's supposed to be an integer, right? And yet supposed to be a string, and yet you're passing an integer. Are you 100% sure? So you maybe either mistook one field or the other, but you'll be able to detect this one quickly. More type safety in your JavaScript. Another feature that I want to show you, it's actually pretty cool, and it's under the hood. It's the ability for the plugin itself, for actually not for the plugin itself, for the Vue plugin, but it's also for all the plugins related to JavaScript frontends. It's the ability to define what are called web types, which is a project that we started, and this allows better code completion, better intelligence from the IDEs or from the refactoring tools they provide, so that you can get more benefits out of that. I'm not sure how to, if I can properly explain this, but there's an article that I linked there, which goes to our colleagues from WebStorm. And it goes into details exactly on how this works, why the project was created, and what are the benefits. As I said, the Vue.js plugin already benefits from this. If you find any issues, please do report them to us. But you should be able to get better assistance from your editor and from all the frameworks that we'll support in the future. We started today with JavaScript, tomorrow with Vue.js. Tomorrow could be any other framework that's popular. Please let us know your feedback about this one. Keeping it in the web support, there's a new refactor that we have for React. Let's say that you're using React with the use state hooks and you want to perhaps refactor this. Instead of saying visitors, maybe you want to say counter. How would you do that? Well, you'd invoke the refactoring to rename this. You'd start typing counter. And as soon as you start doing a refactoring in either of these two states or hooks, you'll see that the other hook also changes, right? So counter changed and set visitor becomes set counter. You, of course, have a chance to rename this if you don't particularly like it or you need to adjust it somehow. But at the end of the day, you just perform the refactoring a lot quicker than before. You don't have to rename two things anymore. You can just rename one. And yeah, you can rename the setter individually if you need to. As I said, maybe you need to adjust it. So maybe I have counter in one place and set visitor in another because you need more control over this. Another feature that we have, the class name and CLX libraries. One of the things with support for JavaScript is always that, there's so many frameworks evolving and so on. But if you use React, there's a framework that allows you to get better naming and different classes here, right? The CLX. Now, the IDE supports completion for all the classes that your CSS has, and you can check them out. You simply just start typing, you use it as a class name, CLX, and then say, I want this to be a button info, because why not? And yeah, it's button info. Right, so let's move to version control. In version control, up until now, whenever you do a commit, so let's bring the commit window here, you were able to say sign off commit and then choose an author and so on. But that was not signing the commit with a Gpg key. So if you'd go, for example, in GitHub, you wouldn't see the green verified mention next to the commit. Now, we recognize the importance for security for this. So if you go to version control, choose Git from the list, scroll all the way down, you'd be able to see a button saying configure Gpg key. Now, not going to show you how to generate one or how to use it. Just know that in the IDE, you are able to now sign your commits with GPG. Of course, every time you commit, if your key has a password, it's going to require that password. And yeah, that's it. Then your commits will be verified. How does that look like? Well, let me pull again the GitHub repository with the 2021.2 tips. And if I show you the commit here, you can see that it says verified. So it is using my GPG key. And there are some new features related to commits too, if we talk about commits right now. One of them is the ability for you to run, for example, tests. So here it says run go and the name of the test because that's the test I used to run a previous commit. And you can choose to activate or deactivate this every commit that you have. You can also select a bunch of tests from the list. So you can say, hey, I want to run this. I want to run a particular test because maybe you have a particular configuration that you want to explore. But you can only choose one. So for example, I can only choose this one or the test subtests or something like that. How do you run multiple tests? Well, I can go here to run, edit configurations, and you see the list of all the Go test configurations here, right? I have a bunch of them. I can say plus, and then I can say compound. Whenever I choose the compound test, compound run configuration, it's going to allow me to perform different actions, right? So for example, I can say multi-test. And now I can select whatever run configuration I need to make sure that this works. So I can say go test, I can say subtest. Hey, I can even say this one, because why not? We can do that. I can choose to save this much like I can any other run configuration, or simply click on OK and have it local to me. Wait a second for the IDE to say, yeah, okay, it's all valid and it looks good and so on. Oh, Windows, sorry. Okay, so I can save this. And let me close this. Actually, I don't think I saved it. Yeah, have I saved it? Yes, it's there. Okay. And in the configuration, now I can go with multitest. So if you, let's say workaround, but it's not the correct word. If you want to run multiple tests, or if you want, for example, to say, I want to run the Docker configuration to bring up the Docker container or the Docker compose, and then I want to run these tests, and perhaps after that, I want to run something else, you can do that. You can also use the before run in each configuration to chain run configurations. So you can choose multiple ways to handle this. Pretty useful to make sure that you don't commit any code that otherwise would be code in the CI/CD pipeline. So you get a faster loop for your feedback. I don't have anything to commit right now, so yeah, I can't show you this. Oh, and while we are here, I can show you that we also have, for example, if you place to-dos in your list, you can use the to-do configuration and, hey, show all the to-dos or do some filtering around. You can run cleanup, which is enabled by default, and you can select the profile that you want, and you can perform cleanup of your code. So for example, remove redundant parentheses or redundant, anything that's redundant or not needed, like an implicit type conversion where the type is still specified. That works too. Or you can analyze your code. So you can say, hey, I have different profiles for inspections, but I want on commit. Before I do any commit, I want to run all the inspections in the project, or I want to run what's stored in the IDE under a certain profile. I can do that. Oh, and finally, you can also run Go FMT. So if you need an extra layer of security that your Go code is formatted using Go FMT, you can enable that if it's not already enabled for your configuration. And it's going to run Go FMT for you automatically before committing the Go files. As a side tip, although it's from an older version of GoLand, you can run any tools after commit, so you can even upload the files to some remote server if you have that configured. It's worth checking out this dialog. As someone asks me how to get this dialog, so let me quickly go to here and say switch to the commit dialog instead. And when I invoke this, it's gonna do the refresh VCS and so on. And then it's gonna show me the old dialog that you're used to. Now, you can go here and under commit, in version control, so settings or preferences, version control commit, you can say use non-modal commit interface. So you can enable that, and you're using this, which brings up the interface for running tests. Okay, let's move forward. So I talked about the inspections, cleanup, and so on. Let's have a quick look at our Docker support. If you're new to Docker, I think this change is welcome, because now what you can do is you can invoke quick documentation on anything like, for example, workdir, or you can simply hover on something if you have that feature activated, and you'll be able to see a snippet of documentation of what is the statement about, what does it try to do, maybe a couple of examples of how to use it, and then yeah, you'll get a bit more sense. Plus, it sends you to the online documentation. So if you see the online documentation link, then that's awesome. Click on that, and it's going to send you to the right page in the Docker help manual. Of course, this works for Docker Compose too. I'm not going to show that. Let me show you how we can run some new actions here. So if I say, okay, run me the Postgres container, I wonder what name is going to pick up. Okay, so I have this container. Up until now, you couldn't really do too much. You can restart it, or you can stop it and delete it. But if you want to pause it, you couldn't. With the new feature, you can say, hey, I want to pause this container, press pause. Maybe there's something that you need to validate, right? So you can simply hit pause, and you can also say, unpause my container. That's fine. Or you can say, hey, I want to restart the container. And it's just going to restart the container. It's not going to show the whole build. So it's not going to go through all the Docker build process again. It's just going to run the container again. You also are able to see the logs from, let's say, previous sessions, or you get to have the timestamps, but it's going to make a bit more output in the window. So yeah, it's up to you how to use this feature. Switch back to our README. So for Docker Compose, there are a few new other features besides the quick documentation one. One of them being that ports, when you're doing port mapping, you'd get better understanding of invalid configurations before running Docker Compose. So things like this one, hey, you're doing a mapping with ports that are not quoted, probably not a good idea, this being YAML, our favorite language, right? Even better, if the port mapping does not appear to, let's say, make sense, then it's going to show up here. And similarly, if you have, I don't know, a name or something for the port, it's not going to show up either, and you'll be able to see the format too. Okay, what about, let's say, multiple services and how, like, controlling them and so on? So whenever you run this, let's say I want to run this in a the other DB1, and let me call this quickly DB2. So I'm running all services here now. Fortunately, it's gonna be hopefully quick enough. Yeah, probably I need to do a bit more changes, especially if I want to name them DB2. Q1. Let me minimize this. So DB1, and let's call this DB0, the original DB. Right, so whenever you see problems like this, you could only select, let's say, one of the service so far, and you could only say press play on this one, or press play on this one, or delete them, or stop them. Now you can select multiple services, and you can say, hey, I want you to stop this, and it's gonna show you the confirmation for all containers and so on. But it's gonna be able to allow you to configure or handle multiple Docker services at once. And yes, you're able to see the configuration as before. You can also do the post containers or stop container operations, or even the restart container. You can click on multiple of these and have it done. There are a couple of inspections for other values in this Docker compose. So for example, you'll see if you're specifying an invalid SHM size for the memory, and it doesn't matter what you're putting in there or where it is, if it's in the build context or in the service context, it's going to be the same. And same goes for the device C group rules. So if you're playing with this and you're not particularly sure how to use it, the IDE now allows you to better visualize this. Okay. For Kubernetes, I think this is a welcomed change, and it's related to you working, for example, in environments where your DevOps engineers or your system administrators, or even yourself, because you shouldn't be running all day with all the permissions that you can have restricted your access to the Kubernetes namespaces. So what do you do if you want to say, for example, list everything in a particular namespace that you know you have access to, but the IDE can't show you the namespace in the list? Now you can go to settings or preferences. You can click on the build execution deployment again, select Kubernetes from there. And at the bottom of the window, you can say namespaces. Now, namespaces, you can add those, and it's gonna allow you to see the namespace, basically actually type in the namespace that you want. You can choose if it's the project scope or the global scope. And then, yeah, configure this as you I'm not going to hit OK on this one because there's no namespace named like that on my machine. But just so you know, you can then come here to Docker. You can click on the namespace icon, right? And you would be able to see all the namespaces. Let me quickly add a live demo namespace. So if I think I clicked cancel, haven't I? Anyway, so you'd be able to see your namespace here, and it's going to work out. Also, keep in mind that for me, it allows me to list the namespaces since I'm connected to Docker on my local machine. As we are getting closer, let me show you some of the platform features that we have. I'm excited to say that we've improved the accessibility for our IDEs. And now if you're using a screen reader, especially on Mac OS, the code completion options will be read out loud, right? And we've improved that part of the IDE. Also reduce the numbers of help tooltips that your screen reader has to go through. And the results from Search Everywhere are now pronounced better, so properly pronounced. If you do encounter other accessibility issues with our IDs, we are always welcoming your feedback, and please let us know either in the comments in this video or on our issue tracker about this, or anywhere else in our help through the help team, or social media. Another important feature is the ability to run different actions on save. And you'd say, hey, you have file watchers, which could run external programs. But what this feature does is that it allows you to configure inside of IDE actions that are running on save. So for example, if you go to Tools, Actions on Save, under Settings and Preferences, of course, you'd be able to say, hey, when I press save, I want to run the reformat for the code. And you can choose different scopes. You can choose, hey, only the code that changed, only the whole file. You can configure the scope. You can do pretty much whatever you want. By the way, we introduced back and forth icons and buttons, but you could always use the shortcuts that they show here. Back on track to our actions on save feature, you can run optimize code, rearrange code for the language that support it. You can trigger file watchers through this feature. So this is going to be like an explicit save file watcher, and perform other actions on save. Please keep in mind that on save also means that it's going to run on autosave option, on autosave. And although you have the autosave options that are configurable, such as the every 15 seconds in my case, or when you switch between applications or in the terminal, you may not be able to always turn off the save, because, for example, some plugins may require that, or your run configuration might require that. So yeah, just keep that in mind whenever you configure anything. Same goes for file watchers, actually. Right, we made a number of improvements. I should have left this open. In terms of accessing hidden features of our IDE. Actually, it's not hidden as much as less common and more advanced features. So one of them would be, for example, the number of maximum recent projects, or if you remember in the run configurations, there used to be a different looking dialog, which also allowed you to configure the run or debug configuration limit. So how many temporary configurations should you have for run configurations? That change, that setting was moved here to advanced settings. And you can also configure, for example, the local history and the days of retention for that. As you can see, I changed mine from 5 days to 999, just because I think the local history is awesome, and it's probably saved me a few times more than I'm happy to admit right now. If you make any changes, or if you accidentally delete the whole file, commit it as deleted, and you can't do anything about it, or like have a merge conflict or anything that messes up your files, then you can go back in history. Let me quickly show you for those that are not familiar with that. If I right click anywhere or just select something and say local history, show history, I can see the history of all of these, and I can see all the files that are changed. Plus, this is the feature that I wanted to show you. You get labels to know whenever some action happened in the IDE, such as, for example, running a test, which failed or passed, or performing a commit, performing some VCS operations. And I think we should also have what I'm not particularly sure. Yeah, whenever you do a refactoring, that's also shown and highlighted. So you can always go back and see, hey, which files did my refactoring touched? That's one way to do it using local history. And finally, there are some configuration changes. Now, I don't know why the sync operation doesn't work here. Yeah, so as I was saying, there are some changes for the terminal, especially if you like a different terminal shortcut and so on. If you go to Tools, Terminal, then you can change the shape of your cursor to be a block, underline, vertical. On macOS, you can use the Option key as a meta key instead. So I can't show you that because I'm running on Windows. It's hard for me to show that, but you can try it on your own. You can also use a pretty nifty feature. So this is the default terminal that I have, and you can configure it to anything. But if you see it here, the down pointing arrow, you'll be able to see that there's an option saying, hey, do you want a PowerShell or a command prompt or a Git bash or the Ubuntu shell, for example. So you can pretty much have these as you want. Oh, and keep in mind that you can promote this to have it as an, let's say, editor tab. I wanted to show the Ubuntu one. So now it's not here anymore. And I have like a proper terminal tab here. If I would exit the Zen mode, I've been writing the whole day Zen mode as Zen demo. You can see the Ubuntu tab here as it would be normally. See, I was about to say to write the Zen demo again. Okay, this one actually requires me to exit the IDE to show you, so I'm not gonna do that right now. Instead, if I'm gonna slowly scroll here on the right side. I forgot to click on the set scroll automatically. Sorry. Oh, could have clicked on this one actually. Yeah, good point. You can preview pictures in the IDE if you haven't done that already. So you can set project icons. To do that, you need to right-click on a project name in the project, in the new project or in the launch screen of GoLand. And you can say right-click, change project icon, and you can now choose an SVG file, which will then be shown in the project list, so that you can easier recognize the project. For me, since I'm using this as a visual cue, that's a nice feature to have. You can also, I think we are running out of time to show the last few features. I'm going to skip this one. You can preview files during debugging. The IDE got the capability shown here on the right side to automatically clean the cache and the logs from older IDE installations. So for example, if you used to have GoLand 2020.3 and you're jumping to 2021.2, you'd see that, hey, you haven't touched this in about 180 days. Do you want to remove all of this? It's not going to remove quite everything. As it says, it does not remove the directories of the version that you are still in use. And it has a list of specific directories and settings that's removing while keeping others. And if you do that cleanup, it's going to save you some space, but it's not going to affect your running version, so it should be fine. Also, quick one, so I can select anything pretty much like this, and I can say create new scratch file from selection. I want to quickly show you how the next feature works because it's the last one I'm going to show you. Then maybe take a couple of questions if you still have time. So now I'm in a scratch file. Because I was in a markdown file, it automatically created the markdown scratch file. I'm done with it. I'm gonna remove everything that I had. And then when I close this, the scratch file disappeared. The scratch file disappeared because of the last feature that I mentioned here. If your scratch file is empty, it's going to be automatically removed. And this works basically with every type of file. So for example, if I, let's say, select this, right? And I say, oh, I want to create a new scratch file from this function only and perhaps re-implement this and so on. It's going to take the file, show it to me here. I see the scratch as being a Go file. That's fine. Click, delete everything, and bam, it's gone. So yeah, that's about it. Unfortunately, we are running a bit short of time, so I see that my colleagues were pretty active in the comments sections helping you out. So thank you to them for this. I hope that there are no unanswered questions. Let me quickly verify some of these. And if, as usual, if you don't have any questions right now, don't worry, you can reach out to us on our social media, in the video, in the comment section below, and so on. Oh, here's a good one. Someone asked, hey, what about merging that pull request? Sure, let's merge the pull request. Normally, if I would run the full IDE window rather than Zen mode, I would have a tab here saying pull requests. I can also invoke it using the switcher, or I can invoke it using the recent files. I've shown you the shortcut there. So if I say recent file and I say maybe here pull requests, so this is gonna go, because the IDE is connected to GitHub and everything is working. This is gonna go and show, hey, these are the open pull requests. I can click on that, and it's gonna show, hey, I created this today. Did a bit of force push here and there. This is my commit, and you can actually see everything that's part of the commit. You can also go, for example, here, and you can see what's in the file, or here in a changed file. So that is fine. You can do that. And you can leave comments, of course. So I can say, looks good to me. Let me comment this on GitHub really quick. So if I go here under, so again, GitHub, JetBrains, what's new in GoLand. Looks good to me. Yeah, 12 seconds ago, looks good to me. And I can go back to the info tab here. I can also see like the whole files and so on. And I can choose, hey, I can close the pull request, merge, rebase, squash and merge. So I'm gonna just say, hey, I want to do a rebase and merge because that's what I want to do right now. Looks good to me. That's it. Pull request was merged. And yes, I'm not even signed up in this window. Pull request was merged. Let me refresh this because lately it seems it's not auto refreshing. So now what's new in GitHub allows you to see 2021.2 tips, which are the tips from today. In the end, I'd like to remind you of two resources that you can visit. It's the What's New page on our website. So whenever you'll visit jetbrains.com/go, you can click on the What's New page and you can see the features. You can also go back a couple of versions to see what's new in those versions if you missed it. You can go on our blog and you can read more about those. Or if you want to learn the IDE, go to Help, Learn the IDE features, and it's going to show you a bunch of lessons. One of them being something that we touched today, what's new in GoLand. And you can do these at your own pace. It's going to show you, let's say, for example, working with JSON. Yes, I want to open in a window. And you just to learn for the IDE and become more productive. That's it for now. Thank you so much for being here today with us. I see that all of the questions are answered. So I wish you a very lovely day wherever you are and see you in the next one. Take care.